melody. Let's go. Oh. Alright, feel me on this side. Yeah.
Ah, shit. What up, YouTube? My name is Rizil, and I'd like to welcome you back to another session of Ill Reacts. I'm sorry for becoming too formal as I go in there. It's a struggle finding out how to approach you guys, you know. Today we're going to be reacting to some Vice TV, or Vice, the YouTube channel Vice. I really like their short documentaries. The Rise of Italy's Far Right, Decade of Hate. We know there's racism everywhere, but me as an African, as a black person, I always hear of different racial disputes between our people and other people happening in certain parts of Europe and the Middle East. And we're gonna look at this, man. So certain like anti-African sentiments. We're gonna take a look at this, and I'm gonna give my opinions here and there. Here we go. Here we go.
We are seeing in Italy a descent towards fascism.
If there's one thing the far right seems to be good at, it's elevating middle-aged men who see themselves as tough guys and love the sound of their own voices.
We're building the wall politically.
You all laughed at me. You're not laughing now, are you?
In Italy, the birthplace of modern fascism, this has led to one of the country's most influential politicians being accused of inciting serious violence.
Essentially hunting out African migrants.
And facing actual kidnapping charges.
What do you say to people who call you a racist?
No.
No, we just want to live in peace.
My name's Tim Hume, and I cover the far right in Europe. I've reported from Italy, where a populist politician's scaremongering over immigration unleashed a wave of anti-black racism. In February 2018, Luca Traini, a 28-year-old Italian neo-Nazi, went on a 2-hour shooting rampage through the city of Macerata. He deliberately targeted people of African descent, seriously wounding 6 people. Traini made a fascist salute before he was arrested. When police searched his home, they found a copy of Hitler's Mein Kampf and other extreme right material. Traini reportedly told investigators that he had decided to kill them all, referring to African migrants.
The act that was thought to be in retaliation for the arrest of a Nigerian man last week in connection with the murder of an Italian woman.
Traini was clearly a hate-filled extremist, but his crimes didn't happen in a vacuum. Many saw a clear link between the shootings and the intensely anti-migrant climate that had been whipped up by right-wing parties during the ongoing election campaign. In particular, they pointed to the loudest of these voices, Matteo Salvini, a brash former talk radio host and the leader of the right-wing populist Lega Party. The same party, as it happens, that the Macerata gunman had previously stood for as a local candidate. Seeking to capitalize on growing concern in Italy over illegal immigration from across the Mediterranean, Salvini campaigned on a hardline Italians First platform.
Prima gli italiani. Prima gli italiani.
He vowed to close Italy's borders to illegal immigration and repeatedly highlighted crimes by migrants, including the murder that had motivated the gunman in Macerata to carry out his rampage.
He had been on the campaign trail from 2016 to the elections in 2018, and the climate changed. There was a climate of hostility towards migrants, which in 2017 became explicit. Daylight physical aggression, some of them armed, against migrants and people from migrant background.
The relationship between Italy and migrants of African origins, of visible minorities, is a very complex one. First of all, because historically already, historical fascism was instrumentalizing a lot this fear about the black man.
Salvini relentlessly demonized illegal immigrants, labeling them as thieves, rapists, and drug dealers.
It's very funny to hear in the country that invented mafia, to hear that migrants commit crime.
He said immigrants had turned the country into a huge refugee camp and vowed to deport those there illegally in their hundreds of thousands.
Of course, all those people who maybe before had to hide their racist prejudice or their thinking that they don't want foreigners, now they can claim it. I mean, if Mr. Salvini says it in television, why can't I say it in the street?
But despite warnings that Salvini was unleashing terrorist forces in society, his campaign worked. In 2018, Salvini won the influential role of Interior Minister.
Italy's new Interior Minister used hardline rhetoric to fire up the voters. Now some fear that in power it could lead to a return to some of the darkest days of Italian history.
He was even bold enough to brazenly flirt with the legacy of Italy's fascist past, specifically its most notorious strongman, Benito Mussolini. In 2018, on the anniversary of Mussolini's birth, he tweeted a message to his critics that echoed one of the dictator's famous quotes, writing, "So many enemies, so much honor."
No one really fears that fascism can take over, in the sense fascism in the historical forms that we knew. But there is a shared fear about the hollowing out of the principles of liberal democracy.
Quando mi danno del sovranista e del populista mi fanno solo dei complimenti.
The rabid anti-fascism that we're seeing today, he said, against a fascism that no longer exists, is nothing more than a deliberate distraction on the part of the establishment.
Once in power, Salvini didn't let up, issuing taunting threats to migrants at huge rallies and introducing tough new rules on migration. During the European migration crisis, charities started sending out rescue ships to save migrants on unseaworthy boats from drowning in the Mediterranean. Salvini waged a relentless campaign to stop these boats bringing rescued migrants to Italy.
Interior Minister Matteo Salvini says it's a matter of national security.
Le ONG sono un problema e aiutano i trafficanti di esseri umani.
In August 2019, a boat saved more than 100 migrants and asked to dock in Italy in accordance with maritime law. But Salvini refused. Migrants, including unaccompanied children, were trapped on board for nearly 3 weeks in deteriorating conditions. Salvini is now facing kidnapping charges for his orders that trapped the rescued migrants on the ship against their will. But he's remained completely unrepentant. He insists that he's not a criminal or a racist, but simply a true patriot, defending his country against illegal immigration.
He has flaunted his everyman image on social media while all but shutting Italy's doors to migrants.
But black people throughout Italy say his inflammatory rhetoric unleashed an unprecedented wave of racism and hostility towards them, regardless of their immigration status.
There's a climate of legitimate, open, uncontrolled, stigmatizing, name-calling of migrants and so on. There was a climate of a kind of legitimized public expression of hate.
I went to Milan in 2018 to speak to black Italians about the radically changed racial climate in their country. Time and again, they told me that Salvini's anti-migrant campaigning was to blame for mainstreaming racist hate against people of African descent. They say it emboldened people to publicly express bigoted views, insults, and even attack them in a way they'd rarely experienced before.
Migrants are not dangerous. Migrants are in danger. And we have everyday cases of people walking in the street and seeing a migrant and attacking him.
In some of the attacks on black people, the attackers even invoked Salvini by name, reportedly telling the victims, "This is Salvini's country." Salvini also drew support from far-right fringe groups like Casa Pound, a fascist movement whose members have attacked minorities.
dobbiamo far sostituire dalla massa di immigrati che sta arrivando dall'Africa.
Casa Pounds and other fascist groups like Forza Nuova were massively emboldened by Salvini's rise to power as he took their brand of xenophobic politics to an entirely new level. And experts say that Salvini's hardline anti-migrant rhetoric has shifted Italian politics to the right on matters like immigration.
All these neo-Nazis group, neo-fascist group, started using migrants as, I would say, electoral fuel.
The major impact of the far right in Italy has been to radicalize the position of more mainstream parties on issues like immigration and security.
Salvini's popularity has built steadily over the 14 months.
Salvini tried to exploit his party's soaring strength in the polls to trigger a snap election and become prime minister. The gambit failed. But while Salvini is no longer a powerful government minister, his party continues to top the polls, and he clearly covets the country's top job as much as ever. For black Italians, the fear is that as soon as he returns to campaign mode, it will send another wave of racism surging their way.
The impact that it had on public opinion and public debates will not be washed out. And this is what happens very often with far-right campaigns. They lose in practical terms, and in this case in front of the justice, but they leave a strong cultural legacy.
To tell you the truth, I'm conflicted. I'm conflicted because, one, it is their country, right? It is their country. So if they are having a problem with illegal immigrants, no matter the circumstances leading to them being illegal immigrants, I'm sure not everyone wants to be an illegal immigrant. Not everyone wants to just sneak into a country illegally. You want to do it right. You want to change your whole life and move to a different place with the least problems you can possibly have. So illegal immigrancy is not like people saying, hey, let's be illegal immigrants for fun. There's obviously underlying reasons. And even though it is your country, and you should have something to say about the running of your country, how to address certain issues, I do feel like you have to address it in a way where you remember the ties you have to people as a country, and remember the history you have with people and how people have let that go. Because may I remind you that it's Italy, you were on the wrong side of World War II. You know, you weren't exactly on the right side in probably the most infamous war in the history of mankind. You were on the wrong side and behind many atrocities. So that's strike one, and that was quickly almost forgotten because people always focus on the Germans. People never focus on the allies the Germans had. That's always mentioned as like a footnote, like an underlying thing, you know. So there's that, and if we're talking about criminality, if we're pointing fingers, may I point out that, as the documentary said, it's kind of laughable when Italy is home to the arguably the greatest criminal organization of all time. It was created by Italians. Italians are probably the most infamous gangsters in the history of mankind. If we were to point fingers in terms of race, but if we weren't to point fingers in terms of race, and we were to separate the whole black people are criminals, Italians are criminals, and all of that, we could easily say crime is a socio-economical thing and not a race thing. Because I see all of these excuses not just coming from Italy. Italy isn't the only one who's doing this. There's these type of excuses in France. There's these type of excuses in China. All these different places, they have this anti-black sentiment, and it's pointed and associated to black people, like black people are criminals, black people are criminals. And I'm not saying all poor people are criminals, but it is where crime comes from most likely, you know. It is where crime sort of rises, is most likely to rise within a society. So crime is not a black thing. It's not a black thing. And back to in terms of like your way to relate to people. if I may just address like whoever is watching this, you have to be careful because, okay, I grew up in South Africa. I grew up as a South African, even though I am Kenyan. And we have these issues too. And the problems with how maybe South Africa addresses immigrant crime, illegal immigrant crime and whatever, is they go, like we have these xenophobic waves where they start having like riots and protests and all over the cities like Durban and all of that where I come from. You have these different riots that happen, and then immigrants are attacked and ostracized and villainized and beaten and killed, and then it leaves a bad taste in the mouth of the people of their homeland. Need I remind you again that Italy has a sordid past all the way back to the Roman Empire. People are not playing with countries like Italy relating to such things. South Africa, at least people can understand it in terms of like they have a troubled past and they're figuring themselves out. Shit happened within their country that was not cool. There's a lot of racial and xenophobic and discriminatory shit that South Africans are dealing with amongst themselves. Italians, it's a different story. You really have to watch your relations to people because just as South Africa suffered the consequences when xenophobia got so high, countries started turning their backs. South Africa's sporting teams were flying to countries to play sporting events. They were told to go back to their country. They're not wanted. Shit like that. You step out of South Africa, and when people talk about South Africa, now that I've noticed when I'm outside South Africa and I hear the topic South Africa coming up, and like it's almost like people, obviously people, some of them won't know I grew up in South Africa. People will never be talking about South Africa in a good light. They'll always just be remembering the viral news of xenophobia and racism that's coming from South Africa. People will have all these ideas about South Africans, and it's not all South Africans. Now, imagine if people see this, because I don't think this is popularized enough. It's not popular enough of a thing that people know. Because over here, I doubt people know this is what's happening in Italy. Imagine if people see this. What ideas will people have of Italy? Because, again, there's a bunch of Italians over here. Where I live, there are a bunch of Italians over here. They own a lot of property. They own a lot of businesses over here in the East African coast in a place called Watamu. They own more luxury or high-end property than the locals. They have a lot of pull here. What happens when people see this, and then as you are looking at immigrants the way you're looking at, we start looking at your people the way you're looking at us? What's going to happen? You have to know how to relate to people. You can't just be smashing your hammer all over. You need to have these conversations and find a strategic and like diplomatic and tactical. Yeah, tactical is the same as strategic. You have to find a tactical way and a wise way to deal with these type of issues beyond stereotypes and hate and racism. Whatever it is, you need to find a better way to deal with this, because I'm telling you, it's not going to end well. Trust me, I was in South Africa when this shit was happening, and one thing South Africans really realized is, just like these immigrants are here and are subject to us, our people are out there and they're subject to them. South Africans started getting attacked in Nigeria. This is not a game. It's like the mafia, right? You attack a made man, you suffer the consequences. You attack Africans in Italy, what do you think are going to happen to the Italians over here, bro? You think people are playing with you? I'm not threatening anyone, I'm just saying. You have to be careful of your actions. They have consequences. You guys need to get together. You need to figure this shit out. You need to find a more constructive way to deal with the illegal immigrant problem, because just as I said in the beginning of my reaction to this, it is your country. No one's arguing with you. No one's trying to take your country away from you. We have our own countries and we have our own shit to deal with. We don't have time to be coming and taking over your country and then starting to do shit. We have our own shit that we are very far away from fixing. But you need to find a more constructive way to deal with it. Your people are all over the world, man. They're all over the world. Shit can happen. Shit can happen. You need to be considerate. You don't want to start a problem. People just don't take that shit lying down. So be careful out there. Find a good rapport. And act wisely. Don't act off of your stereotypes, because that won't end well. I don't give a fuck about how you feel. We can easily accept racism. Just keep racism and shit on your side. And just don't put your hands on anybody. Period. Take care.
Boy, no stopping the juice. Made myself blind to the views. Watch how I bloom from the root. Road to riches, I'm on route. Ayy, labor to savor the fruit. Yo made us checking my moves. And I be checking your mate. Told her pussy my fate. Ayy.